Welcome back, everybody. Get ready, because today we're diving deep into the fascinating world of tithing.
Oh, yeah. Tithing, always an interesting one.
Definitely generates a lot of conversation and debate. And for this deep dive, we're turning to a chapter from Pastor Stanley Kujokera's book, God's Treasury, Unveiling the Heart of Giving. Specifically, we'll be focusing on chapter 4, where he really tackles this whole idea of tithing head on.
Yeah, he doesn't shy away from it, does he?
Not at all.
Yeah.
He asks, is tithing just this outdated religious practice? Or could it be something more, like a powerful spiritual principle with real-world implications for us today?
A good question for sure.
And, Kujokera argues that tithing isn't just some random rule plucked from the Old Testament.
Right.
He goes way back, all the way to Abram.
Abram.
Yeah, Abram tithing to Melchizedek in Genesis.
Oh, wow. So, way before the Mosaic Law even came into the picture.
Exactly.
That's a really interesting point.
It is, right. It definitely makes you stop and think. If it predates the law, what's the real significance here? What's the deeper meaning?
Yeah. What's the foundation of this whole tithing concept?
It's definitely something to ponder. And Kujokera uses this really interesting phrase, too. Poor as a church mouse.
Oh, I've heard that one before. But what's the context here? How does he use it?
Well, it seems like he's challenging a common perception. That idea that churches are supposed to be struggling financially.
Yeah, I get that. You hear that phrase a lot, churches are just scraping by, barely making ends meet.
Right. And Kujokera actually pushes back against that. He even suggests that, ideally, churches should be wealthy.
Wealthy, really?
Yep. And he says they should use their resources to make a real impact in the world.
Wow, that's a pretty bold statement.
It is. It really gets you thinking, especially when you consider the role of the church in today's world.
Yeah, in our current context, it definitely raises some eyebrows. I mean, would that model even work today?
That's a great question, but think about it. Historically, there were periods where churches were incredibly influential and wealthy.
Oh, absolutely. Think of the grand cathedrals, the monasteries that acted as centers of learning, the charitable works funded by the church.
Exactly. Their resources were used for everything from education and social programs to taking care of the poor and advancing the arts.
So it sounds like Kujokera is advocating for a return to that model, at least in principle.
It seems that way, yeah. And it is interesting to think about how churches could be a more powerful force for good if they had more resources at their disposal.
It definitely prompts some reflection on the potential and the purpose of those resources.
Absolutely. And Kujokera doesn't just stop there. He dives into the purpose of prosperity in general. And basically he's saying it's not about accumulating wealth for personal gain.
Got it.
He argues that the real goal should be to advance God's kingdom through giving.
Right, using your blessings to make a difference, to further a greater purpose.
Exactly. And he ties this directly to tithing with a pretty powerful metaphor. He calls tithing an insurance policy.
An insurance policy?
Yep. He says it covers all areas of life. And get this, with God personally guaranteeing protection.
Okay, hold on. We need to unpack this a little bit. What exactly does he mean by protection?
Yeah, that's a really good question. He doesn't get super specific, which I find interesting. He doesn't define exactly what that protection might look like, so it leaves a lot of room for interpretation.
I see. So, it could mean different things to different people.
Potentially.
Yeah.
It makes you think, right? Is he talking about protection from physical harm, financial hardship, spiritual attacks, or maybe a combination of all those things?
Right. The possibilities are kind of endless. It's definitely thought-provoking.
It is. And that ambiguity can be frustrating for some people.
Oh, yeah, I can see that.
But it also allows for a more personalized understanding of the concept.
True. Maybe the way that protection manifests for one person is totally different from how it shows up for someone else.
Right, depending on their individual needs and circumstances.
That makes sense.
So it's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all kind of guarantee.
No, it's definitely more nuanced than that.
But it's about having faith that God will provide for you in whatever way is necessary.
It's about that deeper trust, I guess. Trusting that when you align your actions with God's principles, things will work out.
Exactly. And Kujokera doesn't just throw these bold claims out there without any backing. He brings up Malachi 3.a to support his view.
Oh, yeah, that's the one about God opening the windows of heaven and pouring out blessings on those who tithe, a classic.
Right. And he highlights a detail that many people might overlook. Why windows?
Why windows?
Yeah, why not doors? Doors are bigger, more obvious. So why this specific word choice?
Good point. I never really thought about it that way.
It's a subtle detail, but it could be significant. And you know what's even more interesting?
What's that?
Kujokera's focus on windows instead of doors actually connects to this whole idea of revelation. He says windows symbolize light and air.
Light and air.
Yep. And he relates that to the revelation of Christ and the refreshing knowledge of God.
Wow. Okay. So it's about more than just material abundance flowing through those windows.
Right.
It's about spiritual illumination, too, a
Yeah.
deeper connection with the divine.
Exactly. And he takes it a step further and ties it to the eyes of understanding. He suggests that tithing can actually open us up to deeper spiritual insight.
It's like tithing becomes a catalyst for spiritual growth. It's a way to enhance our ability to perceive God's truth and purpose.
Right. And that makes you wonder, what does spiritual revelation actually mean in practice? How would someone know if they're experiencing it?
Those are some big questions. And to be honest, I think it can be pretty personal and difficult to define.
Yeah, I agree. It probably manifests differently for different people.
Totally. For some, it might be like a sudden clarity, like a light bulb moment. Or maybe it's a deep sense of peace and knowing. But for others, it might be more subtle, like a feeling of being guided, a renewed sense of purpose.
So it's not necessarily this big, dramatic, mystical experience.
Not always. Sometimes it's much more gradual and quiet.
It's about being attuned to those subtle shifts in thinking and feeling.
Yeah, and recognizing that maybe, just maybe, those shifts are signs of spiritual growth and revelation.
Okay, now I'm really curious to hear more about how Kujokera develops these ideas. Let's keep diving in.
It's interesting how Kujokera uses Abram as a prime example. Remember, Abram tithes to Melchizedek before the law was even a thing.
Oh, yeah, before any kind of formalized system.
Right. It suggests that tithing is rooted in something much deeper, something more fundamental to our relationship with God.
Like a prototype for faithful giving.
Exactly. A model that predates any kind of organized religion.
So if tithing isn't just about following rules, what's it all about for us today? What's the real point, in our modern context?
I think Kujokera is calling for a more intentional approach to giving.
Okay, more than just dropping some cash in the offering plate on Sunday morning.
Exactly. It's about making a deliberate decision to partner with God's work in the world.
Like an investment.
Yes, an investment of your resources, your time, your energy. And remember, he even suggests this investment goes beyond just financial returns. He talks about the eyes of understanding being opened as a result of tithing.
Oh, right. What do you think he means by that?
I think he's connecting tithing to personal spiritual growth, to gaining a deeper understanding of God's plan for your life.
So it's about more than just what we give to God,
Yeah.
but what we receive from God in return.
It's a two-way street, like this divine exchange.
It's a really fascinating concept, but let's be real. For a lot of people, tithing can feel like a sacrifice.
Oh, absolutely, especially when finances are tight.
So how does that fit with Kujokera's emphasis on prosperity? It seems kind of contradictory.
Well, that's where that insurance policy metaphor comes back into play.
Right, God's personal guarantee.
Exactly. He says God personally guarantees protection for those who tithe. But, he doesn't really spell out what that protection might look like.
No, he's kind of vague about it, isn't he?
Yeah. He leaves a lot of room for personal interpretation, which I think is intentional.
Do you think there's a danger in that ambiguity?
Well, there's definitely a risk. I mean, some people might interpret that promise as, some sort of guarantee of financial wealth or protection from hardship.
Right.
And that could lead people to tithe out of fear or obligation rather than genuine generosity, which kind of misses the point, doesn't it?
Yeah, totally.
But on the other hand, that openness also allows for a more personalized understanding of the concept.
Okay, so maybe for one person, that protection manifests as financial stability during a job loss.
Right.
For another, it might be a sense of peace and guidance during a difficult time.
Exactly. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of guarantee. It's about having faith that God will provide for you in a way that's specific to your needs.
So it's a lot more nuanced than just like give money, get rich.
I think Kujokera is definitely pushing for a deeper, more holistic understanding of prosperity. It's not just about money. It's about spiritual growth, peace of mind, a sense of purpose.
He really challenges that poor church mouse mentality, doesn't he?
Oh, totally. He's basically saying, look, the church shouldn't be struggling. God wants us to be prosperous so that we can be a blessing to others.
I like that. But where do you think he draws the line between like individual prosperity and the prosperity of the church as a whole?
That's a great question. I think Kujokera is emphasizing the idea of partnership.
Okay.
It's not just about our individual relationship with God. It's about recognizing that we're part of a larger community.
Like a body of believers.
Exactly. And we're called to support and uplift one another, to use our resources for the collective good.
So it's not just about giving out of obligation or fear, but out of love and a desire to see God's work flourish.
And I think that's a pretty radical idea in our culture today.
Totally. Kujokera really presents a challenge to the listener. It's not a passive give and forget kind of deal. He's calling for us to be actively engaged with our faith and to really understand the power of generosity.
It's a call to action for sure.
And it brings us back to that detail about the windows of heaven. Why windows and not doors? What do you make of that?
Right. It's such an interesting detail. Doors are obvious, easy to understand, but windows are more subtle.
Yeah.
They're carefully placed, intentional. I think Kujokera might be suggesting that the blessings that flow through those windows might not always be what we expect or even recognize right away.
That makes sense. He does connect windows to light and air, which symbolize revelation and refreshing knowledge.
Right. He's implying that true prosperity comes from being open to God's guidance and allowing His truth to illuminate our lives.
So it's not just about receiving material wealth.
No.
It's about receiving wisdom, discernment, a deeper understanding of God's will.
Those are blessings you can't buy.
That's for sure. And those are the blessings that can lead to true, lasting prosperity. So it really seems like Kujokera is saying tithing is about so much more than just giving money.
Yeah, it's not just about the act of giving.
Right.
It's about cultivating a deeper sense of trust in God,
Mm-hmm.
aligning ourselves with His work, opening ourselves up to spiritual growth.
What do you think about that?
I think that's a great summary.
Yeah.
And what I find really fascinating is how he presents tithing as this catalyst for spiritual insight.
Oh, yeah.
He makes this direct link between giving and opening of the eyes of understanding.
I like that phrase, eyes of understanding.
Me too.
What do you think he means by that?
I think he's suggesting that generosity can make us more receptive to God's truth, to His purpose for our lives.
It's like the act of giving itself can actually shift something within us.
Yeah, it's not just about money changing hands.
Right. It's about changing our internal posture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about a willingness to embrace God's principles.
And that shift in perspective can lead to incredible personal growth.
Oh, absolutely. To real transformation.
It really challenges the prosperity gospel notion that's become so common.
Oh, yeah. That gift to get rich idea.
It moves away from that.
For sure.
And it really focuses on giving as an act of faith.
Yeah, an act of trust, knowing that true prosperity includes so much more than just money.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, he's also saying the blessings that flow through those windows of heaven might not always be what we expect.
Oh, definitely not.
They might manifest as peace or guidance during hard times,
Mm-hmm.
wisdom to make better choices, a deeper sense of purpose.
Those are the real treasures.
So for anyone listening who's maybe struggling with this whole idea of tithing,
Yeah.
Kujokera really offers a different way of thinking about it.
I think so too.
It's not about blindly following rules.
Yeah.
It's about consciously choosing to partner with God, to support His work,
Yeah.
to trust that He will take care of you.
And to be open to the unexpected ways God might choose to bless you.
Exactly. Well, as we wrap up our deep dive into tithing today, I want to leave you with one final thought.
Okay.
If, as Kujokera argues, tithing is about partnering with God and opening ourselves up to spiritual revelation,
Mm-hmm.
how might that change your own perspective on giving?
It's a question worth reflecting on because the real reward of tithing might not be found in what we receive materially,
Right.
but in the transformation that takes place within us as we align our hearts with God's principles of generosity.
Such a good point. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of tithing. We hope you found it insightful.
And thought-provoking. We'll see you next time for another deep dive.